previous president of the Malaysian AIDS Council, which is an umbrella NGO of HIV services in Malaysia. So with that, I hope I speak about the community with some validity, although not completely coming from the community. So unlike in Kampala, where there were 4,000 odd respondents, in Malaysia our recently completed RDS in November of last year was a little bit more modest. We had about 1,500 participants involving 3 MARPS groups, injecting drug users, female sex workers, and transgenders. This was actually the first kind of significant biobehavioral surveillance ever conducted in Malaysia, and it took a while in planning, but we had a good collaboration with the Ministry of Health, which funded the study, University of Malaya, where I am at as well, and the Malaysian AIDS Council. So you've heard about the steps that are involved, both in terms of the formative interviews and so forth, that's needed for the RDS and the RDS in general. But I just want to talk about, I guess, in a bit more detail about the preparation of the study that we undertook and some of the critical issues to ensure success of this particular study. The first thing was the engagement of community reps. As I mentioned, the particular IBBS that we carried out was in 3 risk groups, so it took approximately 6 to 12 months of engagement with various community reps, particularly discussions around ethical issues, and also going through the language used in the survey. By language, I don't mean the Bahasa, because we have 3 major ethnic groups in Malaysia, so not only do we have to translate instruments generally from English to Bahasa to Mandarin and to the Indian, to the Tamil language, but we also had to make sure that the language were appropriate to the risk groups. For instance, a direct translation of cooker from English to Malay would be inappropriate if it was a standard translation to what the street IDU would use for the word cooker, which is ceber. So these were many of the details that we engaged the community with to run through the surveys, first in its theoretical paper form, and then actually in practice, to make sure that the flow was right. The second issue was, of course, the ethical issues, and the third is in terms of incentive and payments, which also in some ways relate to research ethics. What might work for one risk group may not work so well for another. For instance, some may be concerned about giving actual cash as incentive, but we engage with the community to see what exactly the different communities felt were appropriate, not just type of incentives, but also in terms of amount for the time that they spent with us. The second preparation was in terms of data collection sites. For all the risk groups that I mentioned that we involved in with this survey, they're illegal in Malaysia, and so finding appropriate sites in order not to generate too much interest from the neighbours and the communities, as well as risk the participants, was a major consideration. Initially, we wanted to provide more than just a research survey. We, like the Kampala study, we felt that we needed to provide extra services, particularly for the sex workers who generally have inadequate service in terms of STIs and so forth. But this proved logistically too difficult in terms of finding the clinics and so forth. So after discussion in the end, we STI services, although they would provide referrals to the appropriate clinics, STI treatment on site. So we rented spaces, and for the IDU surveys, generally were either in clinics that were providing needle exchange or methadone. And so this allowed some easy access to the study for the IDU community. For the sex work and the female sex workers and the transgender groups, we utilized existing NGO sites that were already providing these services in KL. In terms of the recruitment of staff, they were job advertisements like you would normally do, and also through the community organizations that we have a large link with, and also by word of mouth. And as much as we could, we tried to recruit peers, and also for the purpose of this presentation, I'll focus on the IDUs. Doctors at Methadone Clinic and the needle exchange sites also assisted us with finding appropriate staff. So like you've heard before, staff and seats and community reps were trained, and the attendance of the community reps allowed seamless engagement, and again, a lot of attention and input was given regarding group sensitive issues, language, VCT, counselling and so forth. In general, there were 1 or 2 IDU community members at each IDU data collection site. So as I mentioned before, we tried to make sure that we recruited peers as much as possible. Some of the challenges we faced, like the Kampala site, we had a lot of negotiation with local authorities, in particular with the police. In fact, as I speak, we're about to we've just started another RDS looking at the problem of injecting drug users, focusing on buprenorphine injectors in KL. One of the things I've just sent out from here is a letter to the local police explaining the study, but as Joe said, without providing the actual details in terms of where the sites are because this would lead to too much convenience for the police to come and raid these sites, other than obviously sending letters right up to the chief of narcotics in Bukit Aman, which is the police headquarters in Malaysia, and the different divisions. Of course, we'll be going to the local police beat and speaking to them face to face as well. The second big issue that many of the staff faced was the ethics of having community members doing the VCT on people they may know, and so that there was a lot of discussion around that as well, and knowing the results of both the HIV and the STI testing. There was one police raid that happened early on in the study, despite all our best efforts, and so that required a lot of negotiation with the police. And after the explanation and all that we did, we had no further problems for the rest of the duration of the studies. The positive outcomes that we've had, as I mentioned, this was the first big-ish scale study that was done in Malaysia involving the community. On the whole, the community felt that it was there was generally felt that they were truly involved in the study, and felt that the results of the study was very important to the various communities for future programmatic planning. And we certainly learned a lot in terms of future RDS, as I mentioned, the one that we're doing right now, another one that we're planning for the end of the year for looking at the problem of injecting drug use amongst fishermen on the East Coast. That's going to be even more of a challenge because of the more mobility of the population, but we have decided to do RDS sampling for that particular study as well. We had good responder numbers, more than 550 that we had targeted for each risk group, and overall, I think what the study did in the end was give very, very good data that was sorely needed in Malaysia in terms of the HIV prevalence in IDU, which was 22.1%. Amongst female sex workers, I think it was 10.3%, and transgenders 9.8%. I may have got the decimal a little bit wrong, but in the region of 10% for sex workers and transgenders, many of whom are also sex workers. So we have a serious concentrated epidemic involving these 3 risk groups in Malaysia, and we